What is going on, GBA fans? My name is Berk, and today we bring you the Week 3 Pick'em crew for the GBA Season 7. With me, as always, I'm Matty Brawler.
What is going on, everybody? I am back once again alongside Berk to go over the Pick'em crew video for this week.
So, as you can see on the screen, last week, a lot better than last week 1. You have most people going positive, whereas about half went either neutral or negative. And of course, Bill kind of lagging behind at 1 and 7. But Matty, you did pretty well. Not the best this week. We had a 7-1, but you're starting to pull ahead.
Yeah, I'm doing my best. I got some experience from last season, and I'm just trying to hold on to it. I'm really just trying to make sure that I take all the things I learned from last season and apply them to this season. But at the same time, it is Pokemon, so there's a fairly high chance that I could just go 0-8 next week, or this week, rather. And things could just completely turn around for me. So hopefully the momentum will keep swinging in my favor, but you really never know with Pokemon, especially in a competitive league like the Global Battle Association.
Yeah, we've only had one person with the honor of having an 0-8 week, and that was Mr. Dallas Staryu last season. It was quite the week.
I remember that.
All right, so for the first match of Week 3, we have the Free State Torcats versus the Philadelphia Scizors. Now, everyone has picked the Philadelphia Scizors, and I think we're just all really confident that Chimpact is probably going to win this match. He had a little bit of a rough start week 1, but last week his prep was on point, and I feel like he's going to bring that to this week. In terms of team matchup, I think Duncan is definitely going to struggle. I mean, you look at Kyurem Black, Thundurus, Azumarill, Volcanion, and a lot of Duncan's team does not deal with that. Then again, most teams don't deal with all that offense. But even what you would consider counters to electric types in a Alola Marowak isn't really a Thundurus eye counter because it gets things like knockoff and you can easily plan for a Alola Marowak. So I see Chimpact having a really strong matchup. I think he's carrying a lot of momentum from last week, and I feel like he's gonna pull out another win this week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When your Volcanion counter is Keldeo, then you know that you're in a little bit of a back foot type position, and that's definitely where Duncan finds himself because he does have a pretty powerful team that could put pressure on Chimpacts, but like Kyurem Black also just has so much fun, and then like you said, Thundurus Eye, it outspeeds everything but the Weavile, and just has coverage to hit every single Pokemon really hard on Duncan's team. So I would imagine Chimp would want to bring the Thundurus. The one thing that's pretty cool about Weavile now, though, is that it is a dark type, so it cannot be priority Thunder Waved. I know it does outspeed Thundurus anyway and can hit it with Ice Shard, but just in case Thundurus is at full or something like that, it's cool that it doesn't need to worry about getting powered. So Duncan may really want to utilize that Weavile this week to make sure it could maybe pick off some of Chimpact's threats and prevent them from just going crazy. Things like Kyurem kind of not as much, but mostly the Thundurus Eye in particular. So I would definitely think the matchup's in Chimpact's favor, and that's why I'm going to go with him, just because we all know that he's just a very good coach and a good builder.
All right, so moving on to the second match, we've got the St. Louis Rampardos versus the Florida Gators. So why don't you talk about this match?
Okay, well, for this one, I have the Florida Gators. Looking at the matchups, it definitely seems like one major threat to Dan's team is the Mamoswine. I mean, Mamoswine's a threat to many, many teams, but the only way he could really switch into that thing fairly well is Golisopod, and even so, Mamoswine does get freeze dry, and with Stealth Rocks up, despite how bulky Golisopod is, it's not really great switching because if it goes under 50%, then it has that emergency exit ability, which will just switch it right out, and it can't stay in to retaliate against the Mamoswine. So if Gator brings Mamoswine and is able to get it in safely, then Dan is pretty much sacking things because it really puts in a lot of work against his team. And overall, it just seems like the Gators do have the speed and power to break through Dan's team, but Dan's team is very tricky. It is pretty bulky, and also has some power that could break through Gator's team. So I think it should be an interesting one. I did put Gator, though, because he's just been impressing me this season. So we'll see what happens.
I'm going to agree. I think the Gators are going to take this one. Like you said, Mammoth Swine, giant threat to like every single team. So it's not really a surprise there. Another thing I wanted to say is Dan's planning hasn't been the best so far. He's 0-2. I've been more impressed with Gator so far this season. I mean, I know he's only 1-1 and Dan's only 0-2. And I know Dan's definitely not going to want to go 0-3. But Gator, if he can use his team well, I feel like he's going to pull out another win. And Dan, to me, looks like he's probably going to be going 0-3.
Yeah, I would probably have to agree with that. But, would definitely be nice to see Dan pull a win back because, he's definitely a classic mainstay GBA coach and who's always been fun to watch. So we'll see what happens.
So anyway, up next we got the New Orleans Pelipers versus the Alola Athletic. Most people picking John. I am picking Callum. And one of the reasons I'm picking Callum, and this might backfire on me, is not that I necessarily think he has the best team matchup, but I'm hoping that he can win, because if I start picking that everyone else picks, I'm not going to get back into this game. So I need to start picking maybe some ones that others aren't. Hopefully I'm right. I still think he can win, but that's kind of the reason why I picked him. But even still, looking at just team matchup, it's hard to say because I think they have relatively even teams. The Sand Drill is looking fairly scary for John's team. He doesn't have terribly much that wants to deal with it aside from Skarmory, in which case Tyranitar, Rotom Wash, Emboar, he's got a lot of things that want to deal with Skarmory. At the same token, Infernape, gigantic threat to pretty much any team. So it's going to be a relatively even team matchup, I feel, and if Callum can deal with Infernape while also using Sandra well, then I feel he can pull out a win. But it's really anyone's game, but I am going to go with Callum.
Yeah, I was thinking pretty similar things about the matchup here. They both have some pretty big threats to one another, and they both have a decent amount of defensive checks to a lot of the opposing team's offensive threats. So it should definitely be interesting to see what these coaches do to play around the tricky matchup here, because it doesn't seem like either of them necessarily has a great matchup. So it may come down to just who's going to be more creative in this game and who's really going to catch their opponent off guard. So that's always fun to watch. And I just went with John in this match. John's just such a solid coach, and he's always been that way ever since he's joined the GBA. And Callum still is new. So obviously new doesn't mean good or bad, but it's just less experience is, not as good as more experience. So that's why I'm just going to stick with John here, because it was definitely a tougher one to call.
All right, so up next we've got the San Francisco Arcaniners versus the Pittsburgh Pyatas. So why don't you talk about George versus Tup?
Now this one's interesting because George is obviously an incredible player who's always had great success in all of his draft leagues, and because of that, it's so easy to just want to pick him over someone like Tup, who hasn't really had that type of success. But Tup does have a pretty nice matchup here. For example, George is just so weak to that Tapu Koko, especially a physical set. I mean, he could bring something like a Salt Vest Raikou or something like that, Spadef Mew, something along those lines, even Registeel, but no, physical Tapu Koko really could just 2-hit KO and kind of put a lot of pressure on all of those things. So that is pretty interesting. And then Tup just has a generally scary team. He's got things like Chandelure that puts a huge dent into George's team. He's got Hydreigon, which puts huge dents into pretty much every team. And then he's got that nice priority in Scizor, which could be pretty nice in cleaning up George's faster revenge type mons like Mienshao, potentially Garchomp, if it's like a Togekiss. So overall, the Tapu Koko and some of those other threats just seem so scary for George to deal with. But I do think that George has a lot of big threats to Tup's team as well. I mean, things like Mew, Garchomp, Raikou, those are some in particular that could really, really tear up Tup's team. Outside of the Blissey, he does have the Volcarona, so that is another major threat that Tup has to worry about. So I'm just going to have to give it to George, just knowing the type of player and builder he is. But I definitely think it could go either way because Tup has a pretty threatening matchup against George.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with George, and I think pretty much everyone else, aside from if you went from George, and quite a few people locked this match as well for George. Now, I have a little bit of insight into this match, and I know the team builder is going to be going up today as well, so this isn't really going to be too much spoilers, but I did gen George's team, so I know he's got some spicy stuff for the match, and if he can use it well, like he's planning on bringing offensive Registeel, if he can use that well, then I think he can easily catch Tup off guard, because George is a very innovative planner, and even though the weird stuff he brings, it happens to work out well for him. So I really like, I just think George is a really solid planner. He is not going to be defeated for a while. I mean, last season, I think he lost the first week and then won a 7-game win streak. And I would not be surprised if George does that again. So I'm going to go with George.
Yep, me too.
And up next, we've got the San Jose Sharpos versus the San Francisco Giants. And I am voting for Tom again. I was so happy after last week because I was right. I was right. And mostly, besides the fact that I do help Tom plan, as I will mention, I have to put out my conflicts of interest to the audience so they know that I am not quite totally unbiased. But just looking at team matchup, the main thing about Gio's team is he has a very pronounced electric weakness. Tom has one of the best electric types in League format. And if he can use it well, which I know he's going to bring, then Gio is going to have an extraordinarily hard time dealing with it. Because Thunder Asterion, you set up, like, if it's like a nasty plot, Thunder Asterion can pretty much kill everything on the team in one hit with the right move. And that's extraordinarily scary for Gio, and he's going to have to find a way to deal with it. And with his team composition, I just don't see that being very likely. So I am going to go with Tom this week.
Yep. I couldn't have said it much better myself. That Thunderous T is just looking mighty scary to Gio's team. I don't really know how he plans to play around it. Maybe he could pressure it with hazards and whatnot, but he's certainly not switching into it too safely. So that is very scary, on top of the fact that Tom just has a threatening team in general. Even something like the Zygarde this week is incredibly threatening because other than like a physically defensive Umbreon or maybe even Tapu Fini, like he just does not have much for that Zygarde because he's got a levitating Bronzong, which gets hit super effectively. He has Aerodactyl, which obviously isn't very bulky in the first place, but once it's knocked down, it becomes super effective. So that is another very big threat to Gio's team. So also just this season, Tom has been playing pretty solidly. Even his losses were close. Or his loss, should I say. And Gio just hasn't been playing at the level he was at the beginning of last season. I remember he was really impressing me earlier on last season. And I just don't see him being there at this point in time. Plus the matchup not being in his favor is definitely not boding well for him in my opinion. So I think that Tom is going to pull the win on this one.
Alrighty, so up next we've got the Milwaukee Sawbucks versus the San Diego Chim Chargers. So you can talk about this one.
Okay, well, for this, I had to go with MV for the main reason being just that MV's prep is so creative and usually really effective as well. And I don't see Steve thinking of all the possibilities that MV may possibly bring. No one could really think of all those possibilities, but just from watching some of Steve's games, it seems like he preps for the more standard and just normal sets that you would expect your opponent to bring just at first glance instead of the more creative things that they may come up with. So that, plus the fact that things like Landorus T can really have a lot of fun against the Sawbucks team. Even Pelipper, I believe. Let's see. He doesn't really have switch-ins to like an offensive Pelipper. very much at all. So that should be interesting. If he wants to bring any type of offensive rain team, because he also has the Kingdra and the Omastar, which are even more powerful than Pelipper. But yeah, so I think this should be an interesting match. I'm still not the biggest fan of MV's team overall, but I'm also not the biggest fan of Steve's team, and I would think that MV will come up with some pretty interesting sets that are going to catch Steve off guard.
I don't like either team, so no, I agree. I think MV is going to win this one, mostly for the reason that MV is MV. I know that he can plan very well, and despite losing week 1, he's made up for it last week, and I think he's still going to pull it out against Steve this week by bringing some creative mods. Offensive rain just looks very, very, very scary. The only thing that Steve really has to resist offensive rain is Kartana. And while Kartana is very bulky on the physical side, it has paper thin special defense. That's a horrible pun. I just think Steve is going to have a hard time dealing with that, and knowing MV, he's able to plan very effectively and make sure to deal with a lot of Steve's mons. So I'm going to go with MV. And up next, we have the Detroit Steelwings versus the Utah Jasmine. I'm going to be going with the Utah Jasmine. And the biggest reason I'm going with the Utah Jasmine, and don't get me wrong, Crimson has been doing really well this season so far. I mean, he's just coming off a 6-0, which is absolutely fantastic. But we're still kind of looking at team matchup. And when I do look at team matchup, Crimson doesn't really have setup wall breakers. He has setup sweepers in things like Cobalion and I guess like Z Crocodile, but he doesn't really have what I would consider very, very strong wall breakers outside of like Entei, maybe Sylveon, and kind of Kuro. And because he doesn't have all this setup that he kind of really needs to deal with a bulky team like Cooper's, it's definitely going to be very hard for him to break through things like Manaphy, Zapdos, Reuniclus, Hippowdon, so on and so forth. And so, knowing Cooper, he loves to bring a lot of varied defense, and I just don't think that Crimson's team is going to be equipped enough to be able to break through all of what Cooper has to offer. And then, you know, he just has these really strong offensive threats, because you think Darmanitan, what's the switch into that? But then again, like almost no one has a switch into it. Cloyster is also actually a pretty big threat. Swallow is just always this massive threat because of, you know, it's now very usable special attack and Choice Specs Boom Burst. Breloom as well. So I just see Cooper putting together a really solid, bulky, stally offense team and being able to pull out a win this week.
Yeah, Cooper has Comfy. Comfy's coming and Comfy's sweeping. That's all I got to say here.
All right, so moving on. The Comfy sweep. It will happen.
I want to see it.
So anyway, moving on to the last match, we have the Tampa Bay Luxrays versus the Borussia Donphan. And you can talk about this match.
Now this is certainly an interesting one, because Lars probably has the most threatening team in the league offensively, but Mono's team is also quite threatening on the offensive side and definitely has more, you know, typing synergy and bulk to back it up, which is why I'm going to go, one of the reasons why I'm going to go with Mono. Mono also just has been playing very well, like he normally does. So that's, you know, another reason I could see him coming out with the win here. But, you know, he really just has a lot of threats to Lars's team, just the way Lars has a lot of threats to his team. But like I said, Lars doesn't have much of an defensive backbone. Things like Latias, Latias, Mesprit, I guess Rotom Heat are all like fairly bulky things, and Magirna, of course. But if he uses that team more offensively against Mono, then he could definitely get punished by things like the Zygarde, which has very few switch-ins. The Torrent Greninja could really put in a lot of work here. And, of course, Jirachi is just a fantastic Pokemon, and it's a very solid switch into the big threat that is Nihilego. So that is that's pretty cool. And then one Pokemon in particular that really seems to threaten Lars' team is Salazzle. And I know I brought up Salazzle last week just to say that I think it's an underrated Pokemon and it's quite good. This week it's, got a pretty solid matchup. You just bring Salazzle and slap some type of boosting item on it, and you click buttons because those buttons are going to do a lot of damage. So I'm going to have to go with Mono here, even though I think that Lars can pretty much win any game with that offensive team.
I am also going to go with Mono. Like I said last week, Mono is probably one of the best draft league format players. So I see him bringing things that are very effective against Lars' team, and you're not really pointing out one of the biggest threats, I think, in Buzzwole. What is his switch in to Buzzwole? And the answer is pretty much nothing, because Magearna's not taking superpowers, Latias, Nihilego, no, Decidueye. No, like, you would want a ghost type to deal with Buzzwole, but Decidueye still takes Leech Life's neutral, which it doesn't want to. And I guess Primarina resists both, but it's a Primarina. It's not very physically defensive, and Buzzwole gets coverage. And same with Tornadus. It resists both, but it's a Tornadus. It'll get bopped by a Thunder Punch. So just lots of offensive threats from Mono's team. Buzzwole and Zygarde, I feel, are just going to be able to punch lots of holes in Lars' team. And if he can't find a way to effectively deal with Buzzwole and Zygarde without letting Zygarde set up and without letting Buzzwole just kind of punch things in the face, then he should be able to do fairly well. But knowing Mono, he's going to find ways around, a lot of Lars' offense. So I'm going with Mono. And that is going to wrap up the Week 3 Pick'em Crew for the GBA Season 7. As always, leave your picks down in the comment section below. Make sure to indicate your locks. This is going to be a very good week. Lots of matches I'm looking forward to, especially Mono versus Lars. Two really good teams and just crazy matchups. So I'm really looking forward to that match. And so do you have anything left to say?
No, not much. Just to echo what you just said, a lot of interesting matchups this week that I'm excited to see. So I hope you guys are excited as well. Keep making those picks so you guys can contribute to the Pick'em Crew. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video just as much as we enjoyed making it.